All right, so chapter 23 is the climax of the novel. It's called The Revelation of the Scarlet Letter. And before we talk about chapter 23, I just want to make sure that you have watched the video summaries of chapters 20, 21, and 22 and taken notes on key details from each of those video summaries because we're not going to read them, but you're still going to be held accountable for knowing what happens in those chapters on the final summative. So, just to set the context, Arthur Dimmesdale has just finished his greatest sermon ever. And in this first section, we're looking at how Hester and Dimmesdale are contrasted. And so, just to start off with, it talks about how Dimmesdale was on the very proudest eminence of superiority. It talks about gifts of intellect, rich lore, so just having a lot of knowledge, prevailing eloquence, he's very well spoken, and he has a reputation of whitest sanctity. So if we look at the word whitest and think about color symbolism, what does that suggest about his reputation? Well, it suggests that it's pure, it's innocent, it's good. It says that it uses the word exalt, and that his position was of itself a lofty pedestal. So just this idea that he's like above all others, superior to everybody, and that at the close of his sermon he bows his head forward on the cushions of the pulpit, and just this idea of like suggesting that he's holy and he's righteous. Whereas Hester Prynne is standing beside the scaffold of the pillory with the scarlet letter still burning on her breast. So this idea that she's below him, she's a sinner, she's shamed, and just this contrast between how he is viewed and how she is viewed. In section 2, it says Dimmesdale's walking from the meeting hall to the festival. So like everybody's kind of just following him out after his sermon to go to this festival in like the town center. And on his way, he stops at the scaffold where Hester was publicly shamed in chapters 2 and 3, and where he held his vigil in chapter 12. And what we notice about him is that he's in a far weaker state than Hester was when she walked from the prison to the scaffold. It says that he resembled, his walk resembled the wavering effort of an infant with its mother's arms in view, outstretched to tempt him forward. So he was so unsteady that he looked like a child, like a baby just learning how to walk, and like just trying to get to its mother who's, got its arms outstretched ready to catch him. And so there's this man named John Wilson who sees the state Dimmesdale is in, and he quickly rushes forward to offer support. And this is where I want to come up with the read with purpose. So in chapter 2, when Hester's walking to the scaffold, the town beadle put his right hand on her shoulder, but, and here's a direct quote, on the threshold of the prison door she repelled him by an action marked with natural dignity and force of character, and stepped into the open air as if by her own free will. And so just looking at how does Hawthorne parallel Dimmesdale's walk to the scaffold with Hester's walk to the scaffold. And although she's strong and confident and, he's weak and unsteady, they both repel, okay? The person who tries to touch them or offer them support. And I'm confident that this was not an accident, the same exact word choice. And so, like Hester, Dimmesdale also repels the person offering assistance, and just this determination that I'm going to do it by myself, right? And for Hester too, it's like, don't touch me, right? Like I'm going to do this alone. So in section 3, Dimmesdale is going to climb up the steps and stand on the scaffold. And so what does Dimmesdale do, and why is this significant? So first off, he stretches forth his arms before he climbs up, and he says, "Come hither, come my little pearl." And this is really, really significant because this is exactly what Pearl has wanted. This is exactly what she's been asking for. I mean, in chapter 12, when they were on the vigil, or he was doing his vigil at night on the scaffold, she said to him, like, will you stand up here with my mother and I tomorrow at noon? And he says no. And then in chapter 19, she challenges him again. She's like, will you walk back to town with my mother and I? And stand in town with my mother and I? And he says no. And so obviously this really upsets Pearl, and she punishes him for it. But now, when he's ready to do it, it says that with a bird-like motion, she flew to him, right? Which obviously emphasizes how quickly she went to him. I don't know, and it also kind of makes me think about this idea that there's this reoccurring idea in the text that she's not a human, and so it makes me kind of think of like the sprite imp elf idea where I don't know, she's just not like a normal kid. I don't know. So that's just probably a stretch, but the use of flew to him kind of reinforces this idea to me. And when she gets to him, she clasps her arms around his knees, which to me just kind of suggests like how happy she is that he's finally willing to acknowledge Hester and Pearl in public. So it says that so in addition to extending his hand to Pearl, he also extends his hand to Hester. And we can see here that Chillingworth doesn't want Dimmesdale to do it. He doesn't want him to confess, right? He wants to still be able to torture him. He doesn't want it to all be over. But he Dimmesdale asks Hester to support him up the scaffold, and then this is just further evidence of her strength. He says, twine thy strength about me, so it's like wrap me in your strength, right? He says, thy strength, Hester, but let it be guided by the will which God hath granted me. He says, come, Hester, come, support me up yonder scaffold. And then on this next section, it talks about how the minister was leaning on Hester's shoulder and was supported by her arm like around him, and still had the little hand of the sin-born child clasped in his. So Hester helps him up the scaffold. Obviously, he's dependent on her strength here. And then he says to Hester, is not this better than what we dreamed of in the forest? Which actually, like, to me is quite insulting and hurtful, right? Like, isn't it better that I stand up here on the scaffold and die than run away with you and be happy? But thinking about Puritans, and Dimmesdale's a devout Puritan, it does sort of make sense, right? Like this, he's like basically like, I'm doing the right thing now, right? And if we would have run away together, then I would have been committing to a lifetime of sin. And so this is a better decision, right? Because it aligns with like Puritan beliefs. And then he says, I'm going to do this for Hester. I'm a dying man, so let me make haste to take my shame upon me. And so just starting to think about this idea, like, is what Dimmesdale is about to do, is it righteous? Like, okay, he's finally standing up with Hester and Pearl after, 7 years. Or is it actually quite weak because he's only doing it now that he's literally dying, right? And so he won't have to suffer the shame and the losing his position and the punishment and being an outcast. So actually, it's quite weak to do it just in the moments before he dies. Okay, so he's partly supported by Hester. He's holding Pearl's hand. And it says that the sun is a little past its meridian. And so meridian means at its highest point, and so it's a little bit past noon. And this is significant because when Dimmesdale has been with Pearl and Hester. It was at night on the scaffold, or they were hidden in the forest, like the dark of the forest. And so the use of light, and it's the middle of the day, suggests that, the truth is going to be out in the open. He's going to acknowledge them in public. And so it's quite significant, especially because, this is what Pearl has been asking for. Like, at noon, will you stand with us in the middle of the day when everybody can see you? And now he finally is. So, in section 4, Dimmesdale's standing on the scaffold, being supported by Hester and holding Pearl's hand, and Chillingworth is also standing on the scaffold. Dimmesdale's about to speak to the townspeople. So, he says, people of New England, I stand upon the spot where 7 years since I should have stood. He says that this woman sustains me, referring to Hester. He says, but there stood one in the midst of you, at whose brand of sin and infamy ye have not shuddered. So basically, like you didn't even realize, right, that there was someone in the midst of you who was a sinner. And so it says here, he says, it was on him that God's eye beheld it. The angels were forever pointing at it. The devil knew it well. But he hid it cunningly from men and walked among you with a mean of spirit, mournful, etc. Now at the death hour, he stands up before you. He bids you look at Hester's scarlet letter. He tells you that with all its mysterious horror, it is but the shadow of what he bears on his own breast. Even this, his own red stigma, so stigma again referring to your shame, or also also refers to Jesus's wounds. And then it says, with a convulsive motion, he tore away the ministerial band from before his breast, and it was revealed. Okay, it doesn't actually tell you what is revealed. It's an ambiguous pronoun. It just says it was revealed. So Hawthorne leaves it so that the reader has to infer that he has an A on his chest. We know that when Chillingworth opens up and sees his chest in chapter chapter 14 or 10, I can't remember now. Oh, it's definitely chapter 10. That he gets so excited about what he sees, but it doesn't tell. Hawthorne doesn't tell you what he sees, and it's the same thing here. We know that they see something because it talks about the gaze of the horror-stricken multitude, so it's a big deal, whatever it is that is on his chest. But Hawthorne leaves it so it's implied. He doesn't actually say it. So something else that's kind of interesting is thinking about this idea, is this righteous or is this weak? You'll notice that Dimmesdale refers to himself in the third person. He never actually says I. And actually, it's righteous because he kind of confesses, right? But it's actually quite weak in the fact that he doesn't literally say, I committed adultery. I had a relationship with Hester, that's my daughter. And he very much leaves it open to interpretation. He doesn't actually confess. He implies it was him, but he doesn't actually say it. And if you think about it, he's just given the most amazing sermon ever, right? And then everybody's followed him out, and then he mounts a scaffold. And so this could very much be seen as a continuation of his sermon. And if we think about the story of Jesus and the prostitute, and there was a prostitute, and the people were getting ready to stone her, and Jesus said, he who is without sin casts the first stone, basically making a point that you're all sinners, right? And you don't have any right to stone her and hurt her and judge her because you're a sinner as well. And so by Dimmesdale taking the town adulteress and standing with her and saying we're all sinners, he's basically doing what Christ did. And so some people might not actually believe that he was the one who committed adultery with her. They might just think that, like, in his dying moments, he was teaching a lesson that even those amongst you who are like exalted and viewed as holy and pure, everybody's a sinner, right? And that's just like his dying message he's leaving with everybody. And so actually that could be considered as him being quite weak, in the fact that he like doesn't actually say it, and then he dies this like glorious death. He's got triumph in his face, as if he'd won a victory, and like just how wonderful he still is. So in this final section, how does Pearl feel about her father? How do you know? So it says that he asked, "Dear little Pearl, wilt thou kiss me now?" And if we think about in chapter 19, when he kisses Pearl, Pearl rushes to the brook and washes off the kiss, like basically a rejection of Dimmesdale, because she's mad at him because he won't stand in town with her and her mother. And now this time it says Pearl kissed his lips and that her tears fell upon her father's cheek. So it suggests that she loves him, she forgives him, right? And it says, how has Pearl's interaction with Dimmesdale here changed the direction of her life? It talks about a spell being broken. And it kind of makes me think of this idea again of like elf and imp and sprite and all of that, and how she was able to, because of this moment with her father, it says there was a pledge that she would grow up amid human joy and sorrow. So she's no longer going to be an outcast. She's just going to join society. And it says that she's not going to do battle with the world anymore. So remember in chapter 6 and her imaginary enemies that she fought, she's done fighting. And you know how she's been like tormenting her mother. It says that her errand as a messenger of anguish was all fulfilled, and basically that she's going to stop tormenting her mother. And so Hester says to Dimmesdale, "Shall we not meet again? Look far into eternity with those bright dying eyes and tell me what you see." And Dimmesdale says, "Hush, Hester, hush." So he basically like silences her, right? And it's like all romantic, right? Like, shall we not meet again? And we definitely don't get a romantic answer from Dimmesdale, right? Instead, he's got this like air of superiority. It's like he's kind of condescending, like teaching her a moral lesson, right? He says, "The law we broke, the sin here so awfully revealed, let these alone be in thy thoughts." So, if you didn't like him before, you probably do now. Or you probably don't like him now. Because basically he tells Hester, like, I just want you, for the rest of your life, to meditate on the sin you committed. Like, that's the only thing that I want you to think about is the adultery that you committed. And then he's basically like, but God has been merciful to me, right? Praise God. Goodbye. So a very like, I don't know, that's just what he leaves her with. It's very cold, and it makes you wonder, like, how is this going to impact the decisions that Hester makes in the future, right? Like, the man she loves has just told her that she just needs to spend the rest of her life thinking about what she did, the sin she committed. So I just want to bring this up. So in a lot of literature throughout history, women are often portrayed as like the evil one, the temptress, right? Like, I mean, even going back to Adam and Eve, right? Eve is the temptress. And if you think about Of Mice and Men, Crowley's wife, right? She's the temptress, and she's the one who causes the men to lose their paradise. And this novel, though I hate to say it, could very much be similar in the fact that Hester tempts Dimmesdale to run away with him and live a life of sin, but he ends up, at least the second time, staying true to you know, doing the quote-unquote right thing according to Puritan beliefs, and he resists the temptation and he dies this glorious death. Although I actually don't think that's what Hawthorne's going for. I don't think that he's trying to say that she's the evil one, just because of how much he idolizes her, and how society's her reputation changes, and how against Puritans Hawthorne was, and how he believed that they kind of kept you in bondage. And so I actually think that he actually presents a more negative portrayal of Dimmesdale as a follower of Puritanism than he does of Hester. So, thinking about the essential questions, do you think what Dimmesdale does is righteous or weak, and why? So this is your opinion, but, support it. And based on, Dimmesdale dying and what he says to her, what do you think Hester's going to do now? And then finally, which Scarlet letter do you think is the one to which the title refers? Do you think it's Hester's Scarlet letter, or do you think it's Dimmesdale's Scarlet letter? And then what makes you say that? If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.